Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. Summer continues to sizzle in these parts, which may not be said for the latest in sports. But have no fear, I'm packing some heat with some analysis and opinions on whatever's going on, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with Joe's JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard, and for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And just a little housekeeping before I begin. As I have mentioned at the top of this podcast, especially for those who listen on Apple, Spotify, etc., or if you are watching on YouTube, in my little description, if you haven't noticed that I have a brand partnership with OLIPOP Soda. If you're wondering what OLIPOP Soda is, it's a beverage that is not only cool, refreshing, crisp, especially on these hot summer days, but even more so, it doesn't have any of those artificial, nasty ingredients, the high fructose corn syrups, those names that you can't even pronounce that have 16 and 18 letters. None of that. And you have classic flavors such as vintage cola, root beer, cream soda, as well as some funky flavors, including tropical punch, which happens to be my favorite. You also have watermelon lime, perfect for the summer. Banana cream, what? Banana? Yes, you even have flavors like that. So if you go to drinkolipop.com, of course, www.drinkolipop.com, and upon checkout, you save 15%, 15, off your order by using the code JAYREELZ. That's right. Use the promo code JAYREELZ to get 15% off your order. And please, buy them by the case, buy them by the tons. I don't care how many you buy, because you know I get a kickback from that as I partner with the good folks there at OLIPOP Soda or drinkolipop.com. So if you could go ahead and do that, I would sincerely and gratefully appreciate that. So I wanted to get that right out of the gate before we begin. Now, as far as what's happening in sports, yes, this is a quiet time. We know that there are some things percolating, which I'll get to. And I want to start off with baseball, because as we now enter into the final weekend before the All-Star break, there are a couple of things that we have to put on notice here. And the first one happens to be the Philadelphia Phillies, which right now you would think, although the Dodgers aren't whole, we know no Mookie Betts, we know Yoshinobu Yamamoto, we don't know when he's going to expect to return. We all know they're going to try to put him on ice till October. And then just recently, Tyler Glasnow with a back injury, he's on the IL as well. So the Dodgers come into Philadelphia with a bit of a mash unit, and it has shown by the two losses that they've had to endure at the feet of the Philadelphia Phillies. They win 10-1 in the opener, where they had both of their big guns come back, and won Bryce Harper and Kyle Schwarber, who were both on the IL with injuries. And with them coming back and looking into the weekend and getting themselves primed for a big second half, and I'm sure a World Series run, or maybe at least postseason run, to get to a World Series. We saw that 2 years ago, and we know what happened last year in the championship series against the Arizona Diamondbacks. But for the Phillies today, let's see if they can complete the sweep over the Dodgers. Now, the Dodgers, we know that they are in a division similar to the Phillies, that they should be able to cruise to a title. You would think these are going to be the top two teams, 1 and 2, that will be on a bye come the early portion of October, barring just serious injury. And you would think, based on what has happened to both teams, with Harper, Schwarber out, as well as Betts, Yamamoto, and now Glasnow out, you would think the sky is falling in Hollywood and in the city of brotherly love. But because they have sizable leads in the division, with the Phillies well over the Braves, and same for the Dodgers over the Padres, you would think that there should be at least some smooth sailing going on in both of these parts in order for them to get to October. But there's a lot of time between now and then. And all I'm going to say about this series upcoming, or really the finale of this series, you would think the Dodgers, who go to Detroit after this, would want to salvage this final game just to feel better about themselves. And not that this means anything big in the grand scheme of things if they do happen to play in October, but just for psyche's sake, and even with them being depleted in their lineup, that they would like to get out of town. And not really a getaway day for them, because I believe it's a 6 o'clock game. It's not a 105 or 110 game where they could just get out of Philadelphia and go to Detroit. So let me look at the schedule here. So for the Dodgers, they would want to get that win today and make sure that they could go to Detroit with a bit of a good feeling under their belt or in their chests, if you want to call it that way. And on the mound today would be a guy named Landon Knack, who I don't even know. Maybe he's one of these guys that coming up from AAA, whether it's the Bobby Millers of the world, guys that have been not necessarily under the radar. I think Knack is under the radar because I never heard of him. But for guys in that pipeline where they've come up and have performed well, where their name is Walker Buehler, obviously a guy like Bobby Miller who has a lot of promise. Is Landon Knack in that vicinity? I can't say that right now, but he's going to go up against Aaron Nola today, so you would think the series is going to be favorable for a sweep for the Fighting Phils as opposed to the Dodgers just trying to get out of Dodge with one game from the Phillies during the series. So right now what we see, even though it may be a little bit imbalanced with the two teams because the Dodgers aren't at their full slate with their team being fully rested and healthy, but that's baseball. Over 162 games, that's going to happen. And right now, you're looking at the Phillies as being the class of the National League, a team that has the best record, and a team that we would think, when it's all said and done, now watch this be in reverse, unlike the past 2 years where they were wild card teams and they ended up beating the Braves in the divisional series where the Braves were the division champ and had to bye for those first few days, and therefore had the advantage going into those series, knowing the Braves well, not being afraid of them, and just polishing them off in 4-game series before going on to championship series where they won against the Padres 2 years ago and went to a World Series. And last year, as I mentioned, we saw what happened there against Arizona. So I would think these two teams, again, in good stead. I'm not going to look at the Dodgers if they do lose this game today as, oh, there's no way that they could beat them come October, or you really have to wonder whether or not the Dodgers are in the minds there, living rent-free, where the Phillies are in their heads. I don't think any of that is going to be true, but this is an interesting measuring stick as we get to the All-Star break, whether or not the Dodgers will be able to escape with a win today, especially with a pitcher I've never heard of. And as a matter of fact, let me pull up if he has any stats, if this is his first. No, he's 1-2 with a 2.86 ERA. That's how much I've been following the Dodgers, especially from afar, because they have a big lead in the West. They pretty much will cruise to a division title. And even with their injuries in their rotation, and for them not being, as I mentioned, whole, they still are on people's radars, but not enough to watch day in and day out to really zero in on them because they only have a 1-game or 2-game lead in the NL West, where obviously I'd be on a higher alert and my antenna would be raised even higher to follow them more on a day-to-day basis. But this is what happens when they pretty much, since the middle of May, have taken the division by storm and will probably continue to do so from now to the end of the year. And the Phillies, you would think the same, because they have, a 5-game lead over the Braves right now. And you would think that as the season continues to progress, and the Phillies, who have played very well, we know about their starting pitching and how well they performed. And now that they have Harper and Schwarber back, you would think they're going to do some serious damage to the rest of the National League and, of course, to the American League, too, as they will continue to just wreak havoc on this division. They're currently, 8 in the loss and 8.5 games ahead of the Braves. So they're going to have their feet up, and who knows what it's going to be like. And something that'll be interesting, because as we get deeper into the season for both Philly and LA, because when you have these teams that have big leads and are not going to play any meaningful games in August and September, and for these two teams that are just going to want to push the fast forward button to get to October because they're going to be ready to roll up their sleeves and try to go for a World Series opportunity and win the whole thing, that you have to wonder whether or not that the interest level for both of these squads, I would think more so LA, based on their performance over the last 2 years and being out of the first round, I think there's going to be a lot more pressure on them than it would be for the Phillies. But now that the role will be reversed to where the Braves are going to be the wild card coming out of that division, and you would think that the Braves would play the Phillies in the division series, unlike the last 2 years where Philly had to go to Atlanta, where Atlanta had the home field advantage. So just some interesting footnotes right now, and you would think that everything will remain the same between now and by the time we get to October. But one thing that we have to put on notice is what will the level of competition, and not only that, but just them wanting to get through this regular season, knowing that they have just, for right now, sizable leads. 8.5 for the Phillies, and for the Dodgers, it's 7.5 and 9 in the loss. So you would think that these teams who obviously know their way around the postseason and know what it takes to win, but what is it going to be like come October for these teams, knowing that they're just going to try to plow through the rest of this regular season? September is probably going to feel like 5 months before they even get to October. And then once they get there after buys, to ratchet up all of that energy. And I get it, they're going to say that, well, if you're not ready for a division series or postseason baseball, then you need to find another line of work. I get that. But we've seen in these postseasons over the last few years, whether it's the Dodgers, whether it's the Braves, even the Baltimore Orioles, and I get it was their first go-around last year, but for a team that had a bye, won 101 games, what happened? They got swept by the Texas Rangers in that division series. So just something to keep in mind as we get deeper into the season and as we get ready for October, which is still, 2.5 months away, technically, when we talk about the postseason. But one more time, just a receipt to hang your fingertips on as we will continue to monitor this as we go along. And then when you talk about must games, which is weird to even discuss here in the early part of July as we get toward the middle of the month, the Yankees have a must game today. As we talked about on Monday, they have not won a series since the middle of last month when they won 3 out of 4 against Kansas City. And after losing the opening game to Tampa on Tuesday night, they were able to squeak by and win a 2-1 nail-biter last night down in Tampa. And today you have Nestor Cortes, who he's been okay. He hasn't been great this year. He's had his moments where he's been good, but he's also had his moments where he's been awful. And for Cortes, this is a huge start for him. This is a huge start for this Yankee team. They have Garrett Cole going in tomorrow to Baltimore to close out the first half, quote unquote, against the Orioles in a huge series for them. So for the Yankees, they need this in the worst way because they want to go to Baltimore, winning 2 out of 3, feeling better about themselves, and then take their chances with Cole going on the mound in the opener against the Orioles to see whether or not they could take 2 out of 3, because if they do happen to win that game, they just have to win one of the next 2 in order for them to win another series, which I'm sure they will feel a hell of a lot better about themselves going into the All-Star break. Now, the thing is, I'm sure if you're part of the Yankees, you would think that, you wish you had a following series after that, which means that they would be playing their games in their home ballpark, which they have a lot of games to make up because they played a ton of road games as it is at this point of the season. But with the break, and I'm sure they're going to exhale, and maybe this is a good time for the Yankees, whether or not they can win 3 of the next 4 games to win those 2 series and then go into the break feeling as if, all right, now let's just gather together. Like I mentioned, the one big exhale, and then regroup next Friday when we start the quote-unquote second half of the season, and then see where it goes from there. So I think this is a must-win because I don't think, as a Yankee fan or even a baseball fan, and I'm not a Yankee fan, as you guys and gals well know, but if they were to lose this game today, is it the end of the world? No, but that means another series lost, and then they have to go to Baltimore with the feeling of an opportunity that they could have had a chance to win a series. As it is right now, let's see how this plays out, because if the Yankees, let's say they go up and for whatever the reason, let's say they split the bid and lose this game, that's going to feel like 2 losses to them. So a lot to dissect here, and I get it that a lot of people are going to say JAYREELZ pipe down. Why is this a must win? Why is this a scenario where the Yankees would think that the house is going to start falling around them? You guys need a series win. Come on. It's been since, June 13th, I believe, since they last won a series, and they won those first 3 games against the Royals before losing the final game of that series before moving on. And since then, they haven't even won a series. So I don't want to hear whether or not, this is just 1 out of 162. All right, if they lose the series, fine. And we'll go on to Baltimore and take our chances there. Nonsense. Win a series here, you feel better, and then with Garrett Cole going tomorrow, who knows? And I get it. Baseball ebbs and flows. You're only as good as the next day starting pitcher. But with Cortes, who's been a little bit better of late, but certainly not by any means his all-star form of 2 years ago. And then with Cole, who's still trying to find his way, I get it. In his 4 starts, he's pitched well in one of those starts. The start he had in Toronto, the other starts, not so good. But maybe he'll get back on the beam. He'll have an extra day of rest, so he'll go in on a 6-day respite, and see where he will face a Oriole team who right now is also scuffling a little bit in their series, and we'll get to that in a second. But to me, this is a must-win for the Yankees today. I don't care what anybody's going to say. I don't care how you want to slice it, dice it, undervalue it. Not this guy. I think if they win today, I think this could be a stepping stone for what could happen in Baltimore, and not necessarily the second half of the season, but for sure, at least over the course of these next few days, we'll see where the chips fall, and obviously we'll reconvene on Monday to dissect it. And then I mentioned the Orioles before I even get to the Mets, because I know they have a chance to sweep today against the Nationals, and I know some people getting in my ear about, hey, what do you think about your Mets, and so on and so forth. So yes, I will talk about that, but just bear with me for a second as we conclude here with the AL East. Now, as far as the Orioles are concerned, they lost 2 games to the Cubs here, and they had the final game now, and not to say this is a must-win for them, because they do have a 2-game lead in the division, a couple games in hand on the Yankees, 3 games on a loss, but I would think they don't want to go into this series, whether the Yankees win or lose, they don't want to go into the series against the Bombers with a 3-game losing streak. And mind you, they finally had that season series, or that series snapped, where they won or have not been swept in a series dating back to 2022, and we saw that happen a couple of weeks ago where they got swept and actually lost 5 games in a row. But for Baltimore, look, they're on the verge of maybe getting swept by the Cubs, and we know that the Cubs, they've certainly underachieved this year, at least up until this point. So I think if they get a win under their belt, and I believe that's a night game, so not an interesting or not a deal where they have to have a quick turnaround from last night's game to a getaway game. So let's see what the Orioles do before going into their big showdown against the Yanks this weekend. So that's another game that I'll keep in mind here as we move it along over the weekend. And then there are the Mets. All right, fine. And now a game over 500. They won the first 2 games of this series here against the lowly Nationals, and they'll have the Rockies coming into Citi Field this weekend. So this is a time for them to fatten up a little bit. Let's get the sweep today. They do have an afternoon tilt. David Peterson, I believe, is on the mound. So if they could get this game with the Rockies coming in, and we know the Rockies have been a dead team walking since Memorial Day, maybe I'm not even going to suggest a sweep. Get 2 out of 3 there, and then you'll be 3 games over 500 by the time we get to Monday. And now we could certainly take a look at the land as far as what the Mets can or possibly will do when we have the trade deadline, which is actually 3 weeks from yesterday, because I believe it's July 30th. It's not the 31st. So there are going to be a lot of rumblings here as we get past this weekend, especially with the All-Star break being in Texas. I'm sure you're going to hear a lot of rumors about teams that are going to wheel and deal. I actually saw a rumor that Max Scherzer, get ready for this, and I'll get to them in a second as far as the Texas Rangers go, but there could be a possibility that the St. Louis Cardinals could be flirting with Max Scherzer. Now, the Cardinals, they played well this year and certainly are within arm's distance of the NL Central leading Milwaukee Brewers, but could you imagine that the Rangers winning a World Series and Scherzer, who absolutely did nothing? I understand he had a few starts there last year upon the trade from the Mets, but as we saw, did not really pitch well in October. Only pitched a few innings for the most part, and didn't even win in spite of him being brought to the team there at the trade deadline last year. So now you have a scenario where maybe Scherzer, the mercenary that he is, could be on the move. I beg to differ, because with the Rangers, and they have a huge series this weekend, and let me turn my attention to the schedule for a second before I do a look at the wild card and take the landscape there as far as Major League Baseball goes with the standings. But Texas has an enormous series this weekend. And I don't care. This could be a scenario where if they come out of this weekend winning 2 out of 3 or even a sweep, that will certainly bode well for them, I would think, going into the break and moving forward. But right now, with them playing the Astros in Houston, and we know Houston has not been a great home team over the last couple of years, but to me, this is pretty much their season right here. And whether or not they're going to unload players, that remains to be seen. But for the Rangers, a team that's coming off a World Series championship, as we know, the hangover has been serious. And yes, they have not hit the way they have last year. And certainly they've had a mass unit there with their pitching staff, as we know. But for this team, if they're going to make any noise, any hay, they minimum have to win 2 games just to gain a game in the standings against the Astros. And they're currently 5 back in the loss and 4.5 back. They're 6.5, and 2 are the Houston Astros games behind the Mariners. To me, if they really want to impress everybody, sweep the Astros here. And if they do so, obviously they'll gain 3 games in the standings against them and inch that much more closer to a 500 record, which if you want to take the Rangers seriously, they're going to have to get to that point if we want to have them part of the postseason discussion. So I don't want to hear who they play afterwards. They can play the Angels 100 times. They can play the A's 65 times in the second half. It's right there in front of them. And let me see if they have a game today. So let's see what the Rangers are going to do. That is an enormous series for them, and even for the Astros for that matter, because they could certainly put the Rangers out to rest, I would think, with a sweep. 2 out of 3, maybe not so much, but if they sweep the Rangers here, who knows if the Rangers will even come back from that. So that's something that I will monitor here over the course of the next 3 days. And Texas, they do have a game against the Angels. Wait, let me make sure. No, they actually concluded their series against the Angels. I thought maybe they had a 4-game set. So as I look today, nope, they do not. So let's see. They have a day off before going to Houston, so maybe they could rally their troops a little bit. As they know, Bruce Bochy, the manager, this is obviously high alert, must-win territory for the World Series champs. So we'll see what's going to happen there. Other series this weekend of note, you don't have a lot. You do have New York, Baltimore, which is a huge series, as we discussed. Obviously, Texas and Houston is huge. Kansas City and Boston, it's a low-key, maybe 3.5, 4-star, not a 5-star marquee matchup. And I know Texas and Houston, even with the in-state rivalry, but I will call it a 5-star matchup because this is do or die for the Rangers and the Astros as they try to get closer to Seattle in the AL West. And Seattle's actually played pretty good here, and they play the Angels themselves this weekend, so they could certainly fatten themselves up this weekend as they take a trip down to Anaheim, and let's see if Houston could keep pace with them as they're 2 games behind the Mariners in the division, as we know. You have the Cubs at St. Louis, only for the regional rivalry purposes, but to me, that's nothing really to go crazy about. Atlanta at San Diego, all right, not bad there. Minnesota at San Francisco, Toronto, Arizona. Pretty much that's your marquee, or those are the matchups that will keep an eye on. Cleveland at Tampa, not really. Oakland at Philly, forget it. LA, Detroit, you know the deal there. And as far as the standings go with the wild card, we know about the divisions and we know where everybody stands there. And pretty much the wild card is status quo. We know that the teams that are in front, Yankees, Twins, Red Sox, who leapfrogged over the Royals here recently, but the Royals, 2 in the loss, but only a half game behind the Red Sox. And you know what? Now that I come to think about it, that is a huge series this weekend. So even though I mentioned that's a 3.5. No, I scratched that. That is a 4-star matchup here to see whether or not the Royals will be respectable and maybe win a game or 2 up in Fenway. So that is a series that I underestimated when I took a look at the schedule, but knowing that they were in the wild card hunt and knowing that the Red Sox did overtake them, I thought maybe the Royals are about 2.5 games back, or 3 for that matter. And even if that was the case, it's still a big series, but knowing that they're just a half game behind them, that is one that I'll have to keep an eye on, as this is going to be, I would think, more so bigger for the Royals than the Red Sox, because if this was in Kansas City, I would look at it as a situation where, all right, let's see if the Red Sox can win 1, maybe 2 on the road. But now let's see what the Royals are made of, as we would think or even expect that the Red Sox would take 2 out of 3. So that is a big series. And then you have Houston, who is 3 in a loss, 2.5 back behind the Red Sox for the last wild card spot in the AL. And we know that they're 2 games behind the Mariners in the division. And then after that, it's a precipitous drop-off where you have the Rays, 5.5, 6 in the loss. And then Texas, I'll even throw them in Detroit. I know they're tied with the same record, 44 and 49. Nobody's expecting the Tigers to do anything. But because they're tied with the Rangers, and obviously we've talked about the Rangers here throughout this baseball segment, they are 7 behind in the wild card. So as we know, this is a big-time weekend for the Rangers to see if they're going to be anything close to whether it's the wild card or even the division. So that's what you have in the American League. And in the National League, it's Atlanta, St. Louis, and the Padres. St. Louis and San Diego are separated by a game. Mets are a half game back. Now, the Mets actually have, is that right? Mets have 5 games in hand over the Padres, because the Padres are 49 and 47. They're actually going to be close to 100 games before the week is out. Think about that. They're going to actually get close to the 100-game threshold before the All-Star break. And I have to see if they have a game today, because if they do, they do not. So they're off today, because if they had a game today, they would actually get to the All-Star break at 100 games. But as it is, they're going to get to 99. So for the wild card race with the Mets with the 5 games in hand, the half game behind the Padres, Arizona's a game and a half behind the Padres, but tied in the loss. And they have 3 games in hand to San Diego, so that's something to keep in mind there. San Francisco, 2.5 back. Pirates, 3 back. Reds and Cubs, 3.5 back. And as crazy as it is to even say this, the Nationals, who are 42-51 and could be 10 games under 500 by the time they leave Citi Field today, they are 5.5 back of the National League wildcard race. That just goes to show you that these teams are still relatively within, I'm not going to say striking distance, but can you count them out altogether? I have to put them in the mix now only because they're 5.5 back, but seriously, I don't think the Nationals are going to be there. I don't think the Cubs are going to be there. Maybe the Reds, if they get hot here. Pirates, Giants, because they're 3.5 back, and we know about the Diamondbacks and Mets. So hotly contested there, more so in the National League than in the American League, but we pretty much know who the pretenders are from the contenders. And come next week, Monday, I'll do a quote-unquote first half recap. And as we get to next Thursday's podcast, I'll do a second half review, because we have the All-Star break. I'm not into the home run derby. I'm not into the All-Star game. Obviously, it's a shell of its old self. I know you have the Futures game there on Sunday, in Texas, and then you have the draft there Sunday night. So I couldn't even tell you what's going to happen here with the draft. This isn't the NFL where, what quarterback's going to get taken, or who are the top offensive linemen, defensive linemen, etc. Definitely not the case here, or even in the NBA. Who's the top talent? Who's the guy that we have to keep an eye on? Or who are the guys that are going to be at the top of this draft? Baseball is a lot different from that regard. So we will certainly talk about that there then come Monday. But as of right now, that is your baseball there in a big giant nutshell, as we're just 4 days away from the All-Star break. All right, now as I turn my attention, let's talk a little basketball. I'm going to get, not necessarily with the association on a whole, this is a two-pronged attack. One, I'm going to start with the media rights deal that the NBA, which still has to go through the Board of Governors. Nothing's been signed on the dotted line as of right this second, as I lace up my high tops and go through the hardwood. But this media rights deal, I don't know if you're aware of this, but this came down the pike last night, where there is going to be, as it is right now constituted, a record 11-year, $76 billion deal. That's right, with a B. And I'm sure even the NFL and Roger Goodell probably raised an eyebrow or two, thinking that, wow, $76 billion? NBA got that much? So let me start there. So with ESPN, ABC, who we all know is going to be part of the mix, we heard the rumors about NBC and even Amazon Prime. Yes, they're going to be part of the mix, and they're going to be packages throughout. ABC, ESPN, they're going to have their Saturday and their Wednesday package, the Saturday showdown after the NFL season, as well as the Sunday afternoon games. NBC, they're going to have a weeknight game. I believe it's going to be Tuesday. Amazon Prime, they're going to have Saturday and Sunday games, which will also be after the NFL season. And TNT, which will be a part of the mix next year for the 24-25 season. Everybody's waiting with bated breath to see whether or not they're going to match with this deal. Now, they have 5 days to match whatever it is that the media rights deal. Now, I don't know all the parameters as far as the billions that are going to be involved with TNT, because we know that ESPN, ABC is fronting this much. And then we also know that Amazon Prime, NBC, they're putting forth a certain dollar amount. Now, we got to wait to see what TNT is going to do, whether they're going to step up to the plate or they're just going to take their chips and go home. So that's going to be fascinating, because as we all know, TNT going into the last year, and you hear all the rumors about the Inside the NBA show with Ernie, Shaq, Charles, and Kenny Smith. So we know that next week, the Board of Governors, NBA, they're going to meet with the Summer League, and also with it being in Vegas and the Summer League taking off, that the 5-day window, whenever the clock begins, which you think will be sometime next week, that's when TNT is going to have to step up and see whether or not they're going to be a part of this rights deal. But here's the one thing that I know, whether you're a sports fan or not, this is what you're going to detest about this new deal. And guess what? You're just going to have to grin and bear it, and you're going to have to deal with it. Now, we know Jason Tatum just signed the richest contract in NBA history, overtaking his teammate, Jaylen Brown, as we know, who signed that $304 million deal last year. And obviously with Tatum, $314 million. Well, now with this new deal, you're going to have a scenario where the salary cap is going to go up 10% every year. Now, this is, of course, collectively bargained by the players and the owners. So it's a scenario where with the increase of the salary cap, once this deal is consummated, and therefore the salaries will continue to go up, by the time you get to the 2031 season, so the beginning of the next decade, you're going to have players like Luka Doncic as well as Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. They could be making in upwards of $80 million a year. And when you get toward the end of this deal, so the middle of this next decade, so now if you put into your crystal ball what the 2034 and 35 season will look like, you're going to have a player. And I'm sure Cooper Flagg somewhere is smiling about this. That's the highly touted prospect who's going to play at Duke next year, who's been a part of this USA men's basketball warm-up, not necessarily tryouts, but just these practices and the runs that they've had. And of course, I'm going to get to the men's team in a second. But Cooper Flagg is smiling somewhere because in that time frame, 10 years from now, you're going to have a player, get ready people, make $100 million a year. Not a $100 million deal, a $100 million a year player. That's what this media rights deal is going to do. So I get it. That's for down the road. You got to worry about that the next decade. And as it is, people could argue whether or not these players are making way too much. And yes, when we talk about the grand scheme of things, when it comes to the teachers, when it comes to law enforcement, the fire department, whatever it is across the board, how they should be getting paid more. And right, you could certainly make arguments for that. But in this industry, that these owners are making billions and the players are making just exorbitant amounts of money, that's just the industry. And that's just the climate and the market that it is. So there isn't anything else that you could say or even do. Now, if these players are going to dog out their contracts and make the money and then go away like fat cats, that's a different story. But when you look at Jaylen Brown, who signed that deal, and look what he followed that up with, not only a big-time performance this year where he's really turned himself into one of the top two-way players in the sport, but came away with an Eastern Conference Finals MVP and an NBA Finals MVP. And then you could say to yourself, at least for 1 year, well, guess what? He earned it. But now this is something that we're going to have to monitor and wonder whether or not these players that are going to make, in essence, let's say a 5-year deal, anywhere between $400 to $500 million, and whether or not they're worth it, that's a discussion that we all know is going to be futile. But whether they truly earn it, not only based on what they did leading up to that, but what they're going to do from that point on. Because we've seen those contracts for those guys that make the money or have outperformed their rookie contract to the point where they get the big time money and then they fall short of that, or they don't really live up to that. So that's what down the road, I get it, but this is a receipt that's going to get dusty that sometime, God willing, in 5-6 years, I'll dust off and tell you guys that, remember what I talked about on July 11th, 2024 about the situation regarding the media rights deal and what these players are going to get? So I rest my case there. Now, the other thing too, now that I think about it, with this deal, you would think that the NBA, they're going to lean to expansion at some point. Now, I'm not in favor of that because more teams, you water the sport down. And as it is, the sport, I'm not going to say it's watered down now, but considering the NILs and player development, and yes, I get it that these players have come into the league and I'm not going to say they've made their mark just yet, but they've played well, whether it's the Paulo Bancheros of the world or even to a lesser degree, Chet Holmgren, guys that are coming to make their mark. Now, we haven't really seen that along the lines with a guy like Zion Williamson, and I understand he was pre-NIL, but these are guys that we would think are going to be maybe the face of the league somewhere down the road. And as I talked about Cooper Flagg, that's a guy that could be a generational player. We'll have to wait and see. Or even Victor Wembanyama, he's another one. But my point is that with expansion, somewhere down the road, now it's not going to happen in the next 2 years, but because of this deal, and with it being 11 years and all the billions that they're throwing at the league, you would think that there's going to be expansion to the point where they're either going to add another team, whether East or West, whether they realign altogether to the point where they may go the route of the NHL, where you have both your East and West, but you're going to have 2 8-division teams in each conference, or will they go the route of the NFL, which I don't think they should do. As it is, they do have 3 5-team divisions in both the East and West. I think they'll probably just break it down to where it's just going to be aligned where it's the NHL, the 2 divisions with 8 teams, as opposed to the NFL where you have 4 divisions with 4 teams in each conference. So let's see how that's going to shape up. That's, again, for somewhere well down the road, but I just had to bring that up because expansion could also be a part of this, considering the amount of money that the NBA is being thrown out here by these networks and even streaming platforms. Now, let me get to the USA men's team, because all I've heard over the last few days from various people in the industry, or even people like myself who have podcasts and things of that nature, how they're breaking down who should be the starting 5 of the USA men's basketball team. And as we all know, the Olympics are 2 weeks from tomorrow. That's when they'll commence out in Paris. And for yours truly, when I started seeing a lot of these people starting to talk about this, about, oh, who do you think should start? I think it's LeBron, AD, Curry, Durant, blah. Who cares? Seriously, this is a topic of discussion. And I understand this is a very slow sports period. This is a time where you just, if you're a football fan, you just want to get to middle of August, late August for college football and the NFL, and then we could go on from there. And I understand you still have Wimbledon, you still have next week, you'll have the British Open. You'll have a couple of things that's going to happen in sports here over the course between now and the start of the college football season. But everybody is right now sweating their you-know-what's off, number one. Number two, baseball is the only sport in town, and unless you're a guy like me who loves it, or maybe the casual fan that they'll tune in from every now and again, they don't want to know anything about baseball until maybe it gets to October. So now you have a scenario where it's like, hey, who's going to be the starting 5 of the men's college basketball team? Please, people, if this is what we're going to talk about, I want to talk about something else, because I could care less who the starting 5 is, and I'm not going to be up in arms if somebody got the spot that was undeserving than someone that should have gotten the spot. So that's where I'm going to start there. And even with Kawhi Leonard, who mutual agreement by Grant Hill, who runs the USA men's basketball operations, how they felt it was in their best right to have Kawhi just continue to be on the mend with the Clippers and their season forthcoming. Well, obviously it's still time to go, but knowing that he's had this chronic knee injury, and even though he had practiced and had a bit of a limp and he was fine, but they just thought, again, both parties felt as if, let's just go in different directions, we'll bring in somebody else. And even people have been wondering, why did they bring Derek White onto the team, who's been Kawhi Leonard's replacement, and where's Jaylen Brown? And I understand Jaylen Brown tweeted, hey, what's going on here, to a certain extent. I don't know the exact quote that he posted on Twitter. But and probably Brown deserved the spot, considering what he's done here over the last month, on top of him being the spot for Kawhi, being a small forward and having Jaylen Brown do so. But really, I mean, is this what we're going to argue about? Is this what we're going to banter back and forth? And I understand it's fodder for sports talk. It's just something to debate about. It's something to bring up. But this is really a complete waste of time. I could see if this was going to be a scenario, and this is no knock to any of the other countries that are going to be representing, whether it's Serbia, whether it's Slovenia, whether it's Greece, where we all know Giannis, and for Nikola Jokic, and for Luka Doncic, etc. I get it that they're going to be widely represented, and as well as the Spain team. We know Spain is always a formidable opponent. But seriously, with this cast of talent that's being brought to the USA team, and pretty much you would think the last go-around for some of these guys, whether it be LeBron, whether it be KD, this was Steph Curry's first time being a part of the Olympic team, and who knows how many more years he's going to have. He's 35 years of age. What do you think? He's going to play 4 years from now in LA, Maybe because it's LA and he's 39. Who knows? But with that being said, you would think that this is going to be the last go-around for a lot of these guys. So we would think that they're going to be heavily favored. They're going to win the gold medal. And you can have me starting in the 5 amongst LeBron, KD, AD, etc. And is anybody going to say boo? Nobody's going to care. So that's all I have to say about that as we move it along. NHL, nothing really to report. I'm not going to lace up my skates here as free agency has certainly cooled off. I know you have a couple of minor signings, but nothing really to get crazy about or to really be startled by. So I'm going to move on from there. Wimbledon, let's get right to it. It's been a quiet week other than Novak Djokovic earlier this week. And Novak, very surprised by his behavior there at the end of that match against Holger Rune as I break out the tennis racket and lace up my tennis shoes. But for Djokovic, at the end of the match where he beat Holger Rune, and I know a lot of the fans in there were either trying to get under Djokovic's skin by whether booing him or maybe on the side of Holger Rune by chanting Rune, and if it sounded like boos, for him to get on the mic in the building to bark at the tennis fans to say that was disrespectful, that even had the violin gesture if you saw, and for him to come out to say, I hear all you guys, whether you're saying Rune or you're booing, that's fine, but to me, that's disrespectful, and for him to have a mic drop there, seriously, Novak, and I like Djokovic, and I've come to grown to like him, because early on, I didn't like him at all. I just didn't like his attitude, and I could see if this was Djokovic 10 years ago, where I could say, well, that's typical Djokovic, but why would he let those fans get under his skin like that? He's bigger and better than that. He's not a guy that should entertain that type of nonsense, and whether he thought they said Rune or boo, just brush it off your shoulders. And even if he, in the post-match, in the locker room, even if he said something, just dismiss it. Let his play do the talking, which it did, and that's the best way to shut up any Djokovic haters or Rune supporters or anything like that. So he should have known better, and I get it. Maybe it got to him, and he just didn't want to brush it off or felt like he had to bring it to the fans' attention that he means business, and he's just like so locked in, laser focused as we've seen him throughout the years. But that was just a bad optic in my eyes, and even if he tried to say it as easygoing and as pleasurable as possible, it's not as if he came on the mic and was acting like a jerk, yelling and screaming, but still, not a good look. And to me, he could have spared us that as Djokovic is trying to get himself back to the Wimbledon finals, and he actually got a break because his next opponent, which would have been in the semis here, had to bow out with a hip injury, the Australian kid Alex de Minaur. So he leapfrogs that, goes to the semis, in which he'll face Lorenzo Musetti, the Italian kid, 22 years of age. And it's interesting because he's got a little bit of an Italian flair here in the semifinal between Musetti and also Jasmine Paolini on the women's side, which I'll get to in a minute. But for Musetti, who beat Taylor Fritz in 5 sets, not really thrilling or fascinating. What was it? 3-6, 7-6, 6-2, 3-6, 6-1. So it wasn't as if it was a nail biter or went deep into the tournament where you had a bunch of tie breaks there in those final couple of sets. So let's see what Musetti will do. This is his first ever Grand Slam semifinal, and he's going to have his hands full because Djokovic, who's going to do his best to get to that final, and hopefully we'll see Carlos Alcaraz on the other side, where Alcaraz, who beat Taylor Paul in 4 sets after losing the first set, swept the next 3, and no Jannik Sinner, so you're not going to see a Sinner-Alcaraz rematch of what we've seen here in recent vintage, but for Sinner, who lost in 5 sets to Medvedev, 6-7, 6-4, 7-6, another tiebreak, but then 2-6, 6-3, no bones about it, where Medvedev now goes on to a semifinal to face Alcaraz, and this is an exact carbon copy of last year's Wimbledon semifinal, so let's see. Will Medvedev exact any revenge against Alcaraz to get himself back to a final? And to me, this is going to be a big test here, and not because it's Alcaraz, but let's see Medvedev, because he's a guy who does have a major in his back pocket at US Open a few years ago when he thwarted the Grand Slam of a one Novak Djokovic, who was going for the calendar Grand Slam that year. I believe it was in 2022. But for Medvedev, who is a cut below the Alcarazes, even the Sinners for that matter. I know he's the number one player. He's not going to be number one after what happened there against Medvedev. But for Medvedev, I think this is a really big match for him. And even if he goes on to a final and let's say loses to Novak Djokovic, and listen, I know Mazzetti, he could get there, I get it, but he's going to be a big-time underdog against Djokovic no matter how you cut it. But if he gets to a final, I think that will be a big step for him. Now, if he loses in straight sets, that would be bad. But let's say if he pushes Djokovic to the brink, or maybe it's 4 hard set or 4 hard worked sets to where he succumbs to Djokovic, all right, there is no moral victories when it comes to that, but at least he was able to get to a final. If for whatever reason he loses in 4 easy sets for Alcaraz, or maybe gets to a 5th set and loses badly, this is going to be one that Medvedev is going to be tough to stomach. And this is a guy that we've seen him win on a big stage. We've seen him perform against the top 5 players. In fact, he beat Alcaraz, I believe, wasn't it in the Australian in the semifinal just 6 months ago? So it's all in front of Medvedev. And we know Alcaraz is going to be not a heavy favorite, but he's going to be a solid favorite to beat Medvedev. But I'm going to be curious to see how he plays here, whether or not, A, he could get back at him for losing in the semifinal at Wimbledon last year, and on top of that, get to the final and take his chances against Djokovic there, which I think would be huge for Medvedev. Because if he loses this match and loses badly, then it's like, oh, typical Medvedev, that he can't get himself to that next level against the upper echelon talent when it comes to the med side of the draw. So that's what you have with the men's. We'll see what happens there over the course of these next few days. And then on the women's side, you have zero juice. I'm sorry. We talked about this on Monday where you had Iga Świątek out, Coco Gauff out, Aryna Sabalenka out, a lot of the top women's players out. But the one feel-good story you have is Jasmine Paolini, who is the first Italian woman to get to a Grand Slam semifinal, or I believe just Wimbledon. Let me double check that. Yes, the semis. We've seen her get to a semifinal. Obviously, we saw her get to the French Open final before losing to Iga Świątek. So she's the first Italian woman to get to a semifinal at Wimbledon. I stand corrected. So for Paolini, who's had a nice run here, think about it. Came out of nowhere to get to a final against Świątek before she got slaughtered. And then now here she is in a semifinal. And kudos to her. But now as she gets to the semifinal, who I believe she's going to face another opponent where a lot of people haven't heard of, in a one Dana Vikic. She from Croatia. And could she be this year's Marketa Vondrousova, who won Wimbledon last year and came out of nowhere to win a Grand Slam major? Quite possibly. We'll get to wait and see what's going to happen there between those two. And then you have Elena Rybakina, who we would think is going to be, this is her tournament to lose. And I mentioned this on Monday, and she's going to go up against Barbara Krejcikova. Let me pronounce that correctly. Krejcikova, not Krejcikova. One more time, JAYREELZ. Barbara Krejcikova. So with Rybakina and Krejcikova, who is a good opponent, although she's ranked 31st in the world, but she has played well on the tour here over the last few years. So I would think Rybakina, she's going to be in good stead to get to a final, and it would be a shame if Paolini, gets to a final just like she did in the previous Grand Slam, and then get to that point only to be a sacrificial lamb to Rybakina there in the final, similar to what happened with Świątek in the French Open. So we'll wait to see what's going to happen there as we get to the conclusion of the third major tournament in tennis this year. And you know I will encapsulate it all there on Monday's pod. And then a couple other quick things. NFL, I have to bring this up. Cam Sutton, who the Steelers signed this offseason, and I understand there's a dearth at that position at cornerback. We know about Joey Porter Jr. Of course, they released Patrick Peterson, and now as they're trying to piecemeal their secondary, they bring in Cam Sutton, who was drafted by the Steelers, as we know, and was there for 6 seasons, a very good slot corner before going to Detroit for a year. And then we know what happened this past offseason after they lost in the NFC Championship game. And then next thing you know, all these allegations about just domestic abuse and stuff that's gone on in his home, and him being on the lam, almost a fugitive-like, where he was wanted in Detroit, was found in Florida, and charged, arrested, etc. And then the Steelers signed him after the Lions released him upon this news. And therefore came down that because he violated the league's conduct policy, that he's going to be gone for the first 8 games of the season, meaning that he'll come back after their game against the Giants there in late October. So you're going to have a hole there at the other corner spot. Who knows where the Steelers are going to get another corner? I'm sure once you get deep into the training camp and even deeper into the preseason where you have cut day there in the latter part of August, where maybe in the scrap heap they could bring somebody aboard and hopefully fill in that hole before Sutton comes back. That will have to, of course, wait another month or so, but I'm sure the Steelers knew that by signing him, and it was really un-Steeler-like, and I understand they've had an offseason that was even more un-Steeler-like with all the trades and all the signings that they've had, bringing in guys like Patrick Queen that you'd never think in a million years, not only just him being a Raven, but signing a big-time position player to for them, the Steelers, a big-time contract, and then, of course, trading for Justin Fields and Russell Wilson and doing all those type of things. So for the Steelers, a bit of a hole there at corner, and they're not going to have Sutton there for the first 8 games, so I just thought to bring that out. And now, typical NFL, as they try to jam content down your throat, and I know this is the world we live in, yours truly, this is why I'm here, to pump out content here on the channel, social media, etc., podcast platforms, as we know. But I have not watched, and people have been actually following the hard knocks of the offseason with the New York Giants. Really? This is what we're going to do, people? And I get it. NFL reigns supreme. People are starving for the NFL. People are anticipating where the rookies, or the Baltimore Ravens, thinking baseball all of a sudden, where the Raven rookies are going to report on Saturday before the veterans show up there 4 days later. And I get it. We're dying. Not we. People are dying for this content. Not me. I could care less what the Giants are doing this offseason. And there isn't anything that's going to be earth-shattering for me to be compelled to watch what HBO is going to have there when it comes to the Giants. As it is, we do like the preseason stuff. And I find that fascinating. I know they've now dabbled with the in-season stuff over the last couple of years with the Dolphins last year. I believe the year before that was the Colts. So now that they've gone off-season, preseason, regular season, I mean, what's next? They're going to follow a team on their vacations? Is that what's going to happen? Oh, the Kansas City Chiefs. Let's follow where Patrick Mahomes is going to celebrate his Super Bowl title. That's what's going to be next, people. Because, again, they're going to be people that want to consume whatever the NFL puts out. And, listen, I got to admit, what they're going to do as far as their in-season this year with the AFC North, with them being arguably, and I think by bar none, the best division in the NFL, I think that's going to be fascinating. Will I watch because my beloved Steelers? I don't know just yet because I really don't get wrapped up in the hard knock stuff. But that's the NFL, trying to jam this down your throat and do whatever it takes to bring eyeballs to the sets when it comes to their product. So that's what we have there with the NFL. And then finally, let me see where I'm at here. Finally, to conclude, I have to bring this up even though I have no skin in the game when it comes to what's happening with soccer, but because of the news that broke yesterday where the U.S. men's national team got fired, the coach that is, as I take a sip of water. So I would have been remiss if I didn't bring this up, as the coach, Gregg Berhalter, got axed as they had a poor showing there in the Copa America tournament to where they couldn't even defeat teams like Uruguay and Panama. And I believe it's the first time that the U.S. team was eliminated from a group stage of the World Cup where, as we know, with the World Cup in 2026, that the host nation is going to be a part of. Now, of course, you're going to have Canada and Mexico in the mix because it's North America, but we all know that the U.S. is going to be a huge part of the World Cup where the final is going to be played right on the other side of the river at MetLife Stadium, home of the Jets and Giants. So think about that. They had to fire the coach based on their standing here recently and what they did in Copa America. And not only that, how embarrassing would it be? And you don't need to be a soccer fan. You don't need to be even a diehard sports fan to comment about what I'm going to say here. that if the U.S. does not qualify for a World Cup, considering that it's going to be hosted here, and I think there's still some stages to go. I don't think they're not going to be a part of the World Cup, but considering what happened here, and this is why they fired their coach, because they know damn well that the U.S. needs to represent here in 2026, considering that it's going to be played on our soil. And I couldn't even tell you who that coach is going to be. I don't know who they're going to dredge up. Is it going to be a guy like Landon Donovan? And I'm just throwing his name out there because I know who he is. I couldn't tell you if my life depended on it. But I'm sure I could come up with a name or two that could possibly, and I threw Donovan's name at you just for this discussion's sake. But think about that. If the U.S. is not going to be a part of this upcoming World Cup 2 years from now, it is going to be an absolute joke. And this is one of the reasons why I haven't invested fully in soccer, because if I can't expect the U.S. to be there, and yes, I do not follow the MLS and certainly do not follow any of the leagues overseas because, again, I'm not invested in teams like England and Brazil and Argentina and Spain and Germany. Why would I, as an American kid who didn't grow up with the sport, and all of a sudden I'm going to say, oh, you know what? I'm going to follow Spain, or I'm going to follow this team or this country or whatever. I can't. And with the U.S. as it is right now, even if I wanted to follow their team and I couldn't even pick out any of their players from a lineup, but in all seriousness, how could I get serious about even following men's soccer here in the U.S. if they can't even make the World Cup? I mean, think about that. And I understand there's still time, and I couldn't even tell you when the qualifying games are. I'm sure they're going to be sometime next year, or who knows, maybe it's later this year going into next year. I don't know. I don't know what the schedule is because, again, I'm not invested. I don't follow it. But I bring this up not only with the coach being fired, but because the World Cup is going to be in North America, and a lot of the games are going to be played here in the U.S., that if the U.S. does not show up and show out here to qualify for the World Cup, that will be a flat-out embarrassment for the state of U.S. men's soccer and the national team. And one more time, just because I don't follow the sport, just because I haven't invested in it, just because I haven't watched a nanosecond of it, you don't need to be a big-time soccer fan, a diehard soccer fan, a casual soccer fan, or even a casual sports fan to dissect what has gone on here with the men's coach being fired. Because you don't have to be anywhere near the soccer scene to figure out that if the U.S. team does not make or qualify for the World Cup in 2 years, I mean, you can't even make it up. What more can I even say about that? It would literally be a flat-out embarrassment that, and whomever the coach they get, I don't know, maybe they got to dig up somebody's body and just put him there and say, all right, maybe he's going to be our coach. I know that I say that tongue-in-cheek, people. I'm not trying to, by any means, try to make a joke about the dead. I didn't target it toward anyone or any particular person, etc. But you catch my drift. So that's what I have there with the soccer, and that's what I have there with the podcast. As always, thank you so much, people, for carving out precious moments out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what's going on in the world of sports. One more time, go to drinkolipop.com, www.drinkolipop.com. Get 15% off your order by using the code JAYREELZ at checkout. Please, buy them by the case, buy them by the boatload to support your boy. And Olipop is a very good soda. I have them in my fridge. Tropical punch, banana cream. I believe I have a cream soda and a strawberry vanilla, which is excellent. Yes, try those flavors and plenty more. You have your classic flavors. You have your grape, orange, cola, root beer, the cream soda, as I mentioned, and even those funky flavors. They also have a cherry cola, which is very good, but they have watermelon lime, which I like. A tropical punch is one of my favorites. So definitely go to drinkolipop.com and at checkout, use the code JAYREELZ for 15% off your order. Again, I would sincerely appreciate that. Also, my YouTube channel at JAYREELZ, which I post content daily. I also posted a vlog there. If you want to check that out just this past Sunday, please do so. Subscribe, like, leave a comment, etc. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can do so at the following: Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, Twitter, X, JAYREELZ1, just a number. The old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, This is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood, it's in the DNA. Just trying to build up my resume, just trying to put my name out there, just trying to do my best to make a household name out of this podcast, out of what it is that I love to do. Full-time content creator, independent, yours truly, one-man band, just like I mentioned in my vlog. Check it out. It's only 4.5 minutes. You can do it while you're brushing your teeth or preparing your meal. Because I will continue, as long as I'm alive and breathing, to bring nothing but fire, passion, energy, fury with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx to South Beach to South Central to South Pacific and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ podcast, on the flip, baby.